Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Mediwake, and I'm here with Lindsey Deluce and Kelsey McEwen. Welcome to CTV Your Morning, the podcast.
We're starting this week by speaking with some Canadian youth leaders who are making a real positive impact on their communities.
We'll also share our conversation with Sum 41 frontman Deryck Whibley on his new memoir, Walking Disaster, My Life Through Heaven and Hell. It is a candid and raw interview you don't want to miss.
But first, we sit down with former Health Minister Dr. Jane Philpott on for-profit health clinics.
Thanks for joining us, and don't forget, you can watch us live, CTV Your Morning, weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, 7 to 10 a.m. Atlantic on CTV CTV News Channel or your CTV News app.
We're starting the podcast this week with a focus on healthcare. NDP MPs are calling for CEOs to disclose how much they're charging and how they're charging their patients.
Conservatives and Liberal MPs shut down their latest motion, but the rise in for-profit health clinics is really hard to overlook. Some people argue these alleviate pressure on our public health system. Others say it creates an unfair two-tier system.
Anne-Marie, you had the chance to sit down with Dr. Jane Philpott, former Minister of Health and Dean of Faculty Health Sciences at Queen's University, on this important topic.
We last had our discussion about this, or touched on it anyway, when you released your book about a prescription for healthcare here in Canada.
Yes.
Can you explain in broad strokes, first of all, how this for-profit or cash model works when we're talking about clinic care for clients in Canada?
It's a great question, and it's really important to get the details right. There are lots of private clinics. In fact, many family doctors' offices are private clinics. The concern that the NDP have and many others have is the concept of people paying for access, cash for access into your family doctor or any other part of the healthcare system. And the fundamental tenet of our national insurance system is that for medically necessary care, you should get that care based on your need and not based on your ability to pay. That cash for access actually erodes the public system because it drives people into a system where they get to the front of the line, leaving most of the rest of the Canadians waiting for care.
What happens in these models now, though, is that it's not called, obviously, cash for access, but they'll offer extra services that you pay privately for, and somehow that seems to speed up your access.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a loophole that we're seeing sometimes where there will be add-ons, supplementary things that you have to pay for in order to be able to get the care. And that is a slippery slope getting into care. I mean, the reality is that we do have a problem in our healthcare system. People are not getting access to care. There are 6.5 million Canadians without family doctors. So clearly there is a problem, but that knee-jerk reaction to say it will be solved by a for-profit corporate mechanism is not the answer. The answer is to actually properly build a public system with access so everyone has the care that they need.
I feel like the tide is building, though, and the pressure is coming, and it's like water. It's finding its way through the cracks, and I'm talking about private and access healthcare. What are your concerns when you see big corporations wanting to set up shop as for-profit healthcare in this country?
It's not going to solve our problems. It's going to take us to the kind of system that we see in the US, where they pay significantly more than we do per capita for healthcare, and they get worse outcomes. I agree with you. There's a tide of energy coming.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can flow that tide of energy into improving our access to care so everyone will have, for example, a primary care home in their community.
Healthcare used to be one of the pillars of this country, and it was a point of pride for us. When we see this, I guess erosion is what some people are calling it, and this move towards privatized healthcare, some clients will say, they make the argument that, well, I'm relieving the system, right? I'm allowing more people who can't pay to have access. What's your response to that argument?
The problem is we don't have unlimited resources, and particularly we don't have unlimited resources of the doctors and nurses that are necessary to operate a healthcare system. So the more that you take out of the system to people who are paying to be able to get to the front of the line, the longer the queues become for everyone else. And ultimately, we all will pay the price because we have to care for people. And if we make them wait because somebody else has jumped the queue, it will end up costing Canadians more.
Really quickly, one last question. Is it legal?
It's not legal to pay for access to medically necessary care.
But the loophole is this extra services.
There are a bunch of loopholes, and they always seem to be found. But, you know, thankfully, Canadians at the end of the day have said repeatedly that we want to uphold our national insurance system. it's on those of us who are involved in trying to make a better system to take away that frustration by actually improving access to care.
I always wish we had more time for this conversation because I do think it is one that people have every day in their households and decisions they have to make every day. Thanks for coming in, Dr. Philpott.
Thanks.
Next up, we're taking a bit of a flashback to earlier this summer when Lindsey had the chance to speak with young Canadians who are making a positive impact on people, society, and the planet. Take a listen.
Joelle, let's start with you. Let's talk about the advocacy work that you are doing.
Yes, so first I just want to thank AstraZeneca Canada and Plan International Canada for this opportunity. It's very validating and gratifying to know that a lot of the work that I'm doing, advocating, especially for Black women and girls who've been victims of sexual violence, to have their voices heard, but to also have better policies put in place so that we feel empowered to disclose our experiences. So that's a lot of what I'm doing in the city of Hamilton, all really inspired by my personal experience as a gang rape survivor when I was 17 years old.
Wow, so powerful. Kenesha, what about you?
I'm very passionate about gender equality and education and health. Ever since I was in high school, I learned that education and health are really two sides of the same coin. So I became involved with the United Nations. I wrote a lot of education policies and championed many declarations in the UN SDG framework as well that focus on health and education. And I'm really excited now that I'll be at Johns Hopkins studying global health. So I hope to be able to further that.
Fantastic. Farkunda, what are you up to?
So I'm an Afghan-Canadian professional soccer player and social activist, and my parents were once refugees. I am an immigrant to Canada, and so I co-founded Scarborough Simbas, which is a nonprofit organization that uses sport to help ease the settlement journey of refugees and newcomers to Canada. And a lot of the work that I am very passionate about is refugees and newcomer support, gender equity, and anti-racism, and my mechanism is through sport.
Amazing. Wow, very powerful, all three of you. I want to dive a little bit deeper and find out a little bit more about how you found out that you were awarded this. So there were, 800 candidates here? When you hear that number and you three were chosen, Joelle, what was that moment like for you?
It was amazing. So I have been doing Sisters in Sync, which is a nonprofit I run for about 6 years now. And I was just getting at a place where I was so discouraged. It didn't feel like things were working out. Funding was not happening. And I got a LinkedIn message from somebody at One Young World, kind of being like, oh, I lurked your profile. I think you'd be a great fit.
Wow.
I disregarded it because I'm like, LinkedIn, like people love to send messages.
Yeah.
And so literally on the last day, something just told me to apply. So I submitted my application. And when I received the news, it was just what I needed. Honestly, like I was at that point where I was like, come end of summer, I'm going back to 9 to 5, like this is done. So I think this is that push that I need to know that the work that I'm doing is really important, especially with kind of the things that are happening in the world right now with like racism, gender-based violence. And I really want to make sure that I can continue to speak on behalf and speak with other Black women and girls.
Fantastic. Kenesha, how did you find out?
I found out through email. I was so incredibly excited when I heard that I get to attend the One Young World Summit. My sister and I, we have our own not-profit organization. We focus on spreading hope. We're called the Hope Sisters. So this opportunity really is just super exciting because I get to meet young people across the world and hear how they are championing, health equity and access initiatives in their own communities. And I hope that that will be able to forge more collaboration and partnerships. So when I heard and I got the email, I was incredibly excited.
I bet. Farkunda, what does your family think about all this?
Beyond grateful for the opportunity to be able to share our stories and our activism and be able to drive change on a global scale, just connecting with other passionate individuals that want to be a part of making the world a more sustainable and equitable place. And the honor that I will also receive is to be able to speak at the Peace Plenary Session, which again, is a huge platform for us to advocate for what is right and drive change together.
Kenesha, I love that you mentioned too, that's fantastic, by the way, congratulations on that as well. But the fact that you will be with like-minded people, you're gonna be with a whole group of people that want change and are taking action. What is going to happen, Joelle? What is going to happen at the summit itself?
so much. Like we were just talking about it coming up, about just the different activities that we have planned. But like Farkunda mentioned, we're all getting the opportunity to be on like global stages where we can talk about the work that we're doing and get other people on board. I think what happens in this space sometimes that we can be isolated and really just kind of feel like we're alone championing these things. And so I think that getting the opportunity to be on panel, give closing remarks is going to allow people to hopefully want to jump on board, but also feel validated about the work that they're doing, knowing that there's youth around the world that are actually kind of like championing for the same things.
Next, a look into the personal life and the career of Sum 41's Deryck Whibley. Here's Kelsey with that raw conversation.
Sum 41's Deryck Whibley is making headlines and reshaping what we know about the band's history with his new memoir. The book is called Walking Disaster, My Life Through Heaven and Hell. And in it, Whibley claims his former manager groomed him and pressured him into a non-consensual relationship. The book is being published today and follows Whibley as he grew from a teenager in Ajax, Ontario, into an international rock star. Deryck joins me this morning from New York City to tell us more. Great to have you on the show, Deryck. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Deryck, your former manager is a big part of the memoir. In a statement to the Globe and Mail, he has responded saying these are false allegations. I want to know how you are feeling today now that the book is coming out and you've shared this story.
It was hard to write the book. It was even harder to do the audio for the book and say this stuff out loud for the first time. And to put the book out now is even harder. But I find that sometimes the hardest thing that you have to say is the most important thing that you have to say. So I decided to go ahead with it because it's something I thought I would never talk about. I thought I would take it to my grave. It was just something that would be a secret. It is a big part of the book, but it is not the only part of the book. I mean, the whole book is a really open and honest telling of the entire story of my life and Sum 41's entire history.
Well, Deryck, when you sit down to write a book like this, or a memoir of your life and of your career, how do you decide what goes in and what doesn't make it?
You know, I didn't sit down and decide. I didn't have like a list of stories or things I wanted to talk about. I just started from the beginning. And as I got to moments in my life, I just got to those points and at certain ages, and I just told the story. I didn't really hold back anything. I think at first I thought, I'm just going to tell the whole story. And if I don't like something, I can always take it out at the end. But when I was finished with it, I just left it all in. I didn't take anything out.
And you share so much. You also speak about your relationship with Avril Lavigne. You guys were so young when you got together. We have a picture of you here, throwback to, my childhood watching you guys together. Two Canadians in the spotlight of international fame. You talk in the book about being positive forces in each other's lives. What has your relationship with her meant to you?
Well, we had so many firsts together. We were really young. We were together through the early days of our success. And like I said, we had all these firsts. We moved out of Canada. We got a house together. Obviously, we got married, and we just went through so much together. And fortunately, we're still really close. And we've had our ups and downs, but we still remain really close to this day.
In another chapter of your life, you now have two beautiful children with your wife, Ariana. Now you're on tour, but you're a dad this time. So what is that like on the road with two little kids?
Well, the boy is wild, and our daughter is like the sweetest, most quiet angel baby we could have ever asked for. So they're polar opposites, but they're amazing. I mean, it's great having a family that you love to be around and takes you. It's a completely different thing than the family I have on the road with, the band and Cohen and Dave and Tom and Zumo. But, it's everything seems to be in its right place for me.
Deryck, you're on this tour now. You have your last show in Toronto in early 2025, January 30th. Does it feel poetic for you to wrap it up here in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why we chose Toronto to be the last show. When we decided to do this final tour and final album, it was just a given that we knew we were going to end it all in Toronto, where we started.
Deryck, if you could go back, last question for you. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, the teen who worked at a gas station writing songs with customers, what would you say to him?
Just keep doing what you're doing. And enjoy the ride, because I don't regret anything. I love the whole journey, even the downs. I love the ups, but the downs make the ups even better. So I love it all.
Deryck Whibley, I appreciate your time today.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Next up, mortgage rates are slowly coming down. So what does that mean for people looking to buy a home or sell a home right now?
It is not just a fall of rates either, Lindsay. It's also just the fall. The season we find ourselves in right now does pose some unique challenges and opportunities, regardless of whether you're buying or selling.
Lindsay, I know you love this topic. You sat down with real estate broker Erica Reddy. You got a national picture on the fall housing market. Take a listen.
So give us the overall picture. What does the market look like across the country?
So generally speaking, if we're looking at Canada-wide, the market is predominantly quite stagnant. We're just seeing a lot of, various people trying to kind of figure it out. We're trying to get buyers get their feet underneath them, sellers figure out what they should be doing. We've got a lot of movement with interest rates and policies. And so stagnant is kind of the word that I would put for Canada-wide.
Okay, so let's talk about some specifics, because obviously you mentioned rate cuts. Everybody's watching the mortgage rates. Some people are just sort of waiting to see how much further we can go down based on what the Bank of Canada says this month as well. So tell us a little bit about how that's impacting the market.
Definitely. So we've had 3 consecutive rate cuts, which is fantastic. I mean, we've been waiting for these rate cuts. And consumers are definitely starting to feel, I would say, a little bit more optimism when it comes to getting into the market and getting off the sidelines, because we've had a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines and a lot of people just unsure. And so the rate cuts, coupled with now some additional government changes with insured mortgages and amortization, I think we're starting to finally see the confidence coming back in the buyers.
It almost feels like the buffet is being set. We're just waiting for people to get there, right? They're waiting to see what their options are. What about pricing? People love to talk about house prices, if they're selling, if they're buying, where are we at?
Definitely. So, I mean, I guess we can kind of, the soundbite earlier of stagnant probably ties well into softening. We've definitely seen a softening of prices across Canada, and I don't think this is terrible. We've definitely seen a dip in, I would say the larger cities, the larger provinces, and just an overall slowdown in sales. But that is okay. We needed to see a little bit of this kind of reshuffle within the marketplace.
I think that's important to mention too, Erica, because so many times we get like the headline, right? Which is, sales are down, or, all of that stuff, without really taking the bigger picture into consideration and historical trends. This is not an unusual position to be in, I would think, after certain cuts, if the rates are going up and we're seeing this kind of pattern that we've seen before. It's not new.
Exactly, and I think you make such a good point. This, if we look at a larger picture, this, frankly, I think is quite healthy within the trend line. But the problem is we sometimes lose that trend line, and therefore people can kind of look and go softening, stagnant. Oh my gosh, these headlines are awful. They're not that bad.
For those looking for a home right now, what do they need to consider?
So I would say if you're a buyer, now's the time to get off the sidelines. I mean, we're seeing all the momentum of the rates, and the more people get off the sidelines, the more competitive it actually ends up getting. So now's a really good time to get in before everybody else realizes it's the right time.
And what about for sellers? What would you say?
Sellers, I mean, listen, the buyers are coming. They're starting to come out of the woodworks. Also, really understand your micro market, because as we've talked, Canada at large is huge. Your specific market might actually be operating differently than another market. So really understand the market segment that you're in.
What can you do to maximize your potential here if you're selling?
I mean, I always say, make sure you've got everything checked off. Make sure you've got your process from start to finish, prep work, pricing, everything in place, because that's going to really make you shine in this market.
Some people are like, well, I don't want to stage. What would you say to that?
Definitely stage. Definitely stage.
Because what does that do for people? Because often people say, okay, I'm going to stage my place, but it's an unrealistic view of what my house really looks like. But you're kind of selling the idea.
100%. You're really, at the end of the day, you're selling this emotional attachment. You're selling, the vision that someone's going to have when they walk into your home. And I think what's most important, especially in a bit of a trickier market, is ensuring that you have not left a stone unturned. And staging is one of those really critical ones, especially when things get a bit tougher, that you never want to leave out.
Speaking of of stones, always important to remember to stage the outside of your house too. Yes, exactly.
Never stop at the inside.
That's
the curb
right.
appeal
Yeah.
is the first impression. I always say to people, like, you drive up and that's what people see. So
Yeah.
lights on, curb, paint, potted plants, everything. Don't forget.
Yes.
We're glad you're enjoying Your Morning, the podcast. Every week, we bring you some of the most interesting conversations from the show on a wide variety of topics. And of course, we'd love for you to join us live weekdays, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, 7 to 10 a.m. Atlantic on CTV, CTV News Channel, and our CTV News app.
Next, we discuss the case of an Ontario man accused of selling more than 1,000 suicide kits to people from more than 40 countries.
Kenneth Law faces charges of first-degree murder and counseling suicide in connection to the deaths of 14 people in Ontario. His lawyers are watching a case that's in front of the Supreme Court of Canada, and the outcome of that ruling will determine how Kenneth Law's legal team defends him.
Anne-Marie, you spoke with criminal defense lawyer Kim Schofield to help break this all down. Here's what she had to say.
Outline for us in more detail what Law's lawyers are asking the Supreme Court of Canada to review.
Okay, it actually is a little complicated because Law's case is not before the Supreme Court of Canada, is not. So what's happened is there's a case from the Ontario Court of Appeal called BF, and that is a case that's about administering a noxious substance. And part of that Court of Appeal decision was a decision about the suicide context and what it would take for someone charged with aiding and abetting suicide in order to be convicted of a murder. So the Court of Appeal of Ontario opined on this. So they wrote something on this. And the Crowns didn't like what they wrote and thought it was contrary to public policy. So the Crowns in the BF case appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. And then Law's lawyers heard about this, and because the Court of Appeal talked about the suicide context, the Court of Appeal is then appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and then Law's lawyers want to join along. They want to have a say in how suicide or assisting suicide is interpreted in the murder context. So it's a little complicated, but Law's lawyers are applying for the ability to speak on that issue.
I'm glad that we had you explain that to us, Ms. Schofield, but in a brief, his lawyers also said this: assisting suicide is not murder. Mr. Law is not alleged to have been present at any of the deaths. He is not alleged to have deceived the victims into unwittingly ending their own lives. So when you read that through and interpret for us, what is his legal team trying to prove here?
So the legal team is trying to say this doesn't, on the definition of how murder could be committed in the suicide context, this doesn't qualify as murder, and therefore the charge of murder should not be proceeded with, and this rather should be assisting the commission of suicide, which is what he was originally charged with. So the defense is saying, look, this is a stretch for the Crown to be proceeding on this, and it is not available in law to have someone found guilty in this context. So in other words, in selling or in counseling the commission of a suicide when you're not present, when you're not, when you don't have the ability to undermine an individual's free choice.
Next September, Kenneth Law is going to face a murder trial for 14 people in Ontario. How could a Supreme Court decision affect that trial?
So if the Supreme Court decides to rule expansively, so to really define that the law as it applies to suicide, it very much could affect whether or not this is even put to a jury in the first place, whether or not it's even possible in these circumstances to be convicted of a murder. So it very much, even though it's not Mr. Law's case, this is a common law jurisdiction. So the laws are interpreted the same in every case.
So then what could a possible outcome in this decision mean for future suicide and assisted suicide laws?
Well, that they would be charged as aiding and abetting the commission of suicide. So in other words, as he was originally charged. So this is not a murder charge anymore. but rather a lesser charge that is tailored to the commission of suicide, to aiding and abetting the commission of suicide, which is already an unlawful act according to the criminal code. So unless, of course, the Supreme Court of Canada says no, a more expansive approach than the actual assisting in a physical or direct way. So it really, the Supreme Court of Canada could expand that, and that's what the Crown attorneys want. The Crowns want murder to apply to these circumstances, where it is not only foreseeable but contemplated that both the substance and the kits are used solely for that purpose.
What fascinates you most as you watch and wait for this decision?
Well, murder is a very particular charge, and it is the most serious of all charges. So really, as a public policy, we have to consider whether or not we want someone like Kenneth Law to be considered a murderer. I mean, that's really the plain language here. Is he as guilty of a murder as someone who stabs someone in the chest or hires someone to do that? And many would say yes.
Kenneth Law is not only facing criminal prosecution in Ontario, we mentioned there are other provinces, but there are investigations in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and in New Zealand. Could this have any impact on those international investigations or perhaps future charges?
Yes. So the Kenneth Law could face prosecution for acts that are committed here or acts that are committed in foreign jurisdictions, as long as a portion of the commission of those acts occurred here. So it's really up to foreign jurisdictions and the Canadian government, because the Canadian government could decide to actually prosecute these charges here. But if they decide not to, and it seems like the prosecutions are not proceeding on foreign nationals, so it seems very much open and potentially likely that other jurisdictions would request his extradition. But keep in mind, the offense for which he is prosecuted in a foreign jurisdiction must also be an offense here. So if the Supreme Court of Canada says this is not murder on Canadian soil, then he cannot be extradited for a murder charge, but he could be extradited for aiding and abetting suicide.
The province of Ontario is updating how iron deficiency is diagnosed, and this could be a game changer for millions.
Under the new guidelines, the baseline of what's considered a normal blood iron level, that's going to be increased. So what does that mean? That means more people with symptoms can now be diagnosed with a deficiency and then properly treated.
Michelle Scholzberg is the director of hematology at the University of Toronto, and she helped lead the push for these guidelines to be updated. Here's Lindsay's conversation with her.
So previously, the minimum healthy level of ferritin, the protein that stores iron, ranged between 5 to 15 micrograms per liter of blood. That threshold is now increased to 30 micrograms for women and 20 for children. What were you hearing from people and patients that led to these changes?
I would say that over the last 12 years, I've heard countless, and I mean thousands upon thousands of adults and adolescents describe symptoms of iron deficiency that range from fatigue to decreased concentration, to decreased performance at school and work, to cardiovascular symptoms, chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness when you stand up. And so that has really created the rationale for making this change and facilitating the diagnosis so that more people can get diagnosed, which means that more people can get investigated and treated, which is really important.
So important. Now, before these new guidelines, it was estimated that at least 7% of Canadians live with an iron deficiency. So what makes diagnosing it so early so critical?
Yeah, so that estimate is actually a gross underestimate, and based on historical data, we know that in Toronto, women of reproductive age who are not pregnant have iron deficiency, and 50% of women who are pregnant have iron deficiency who are outpatients. And by the time of labor and delivery, closer to 80 or 90% of iron deficiency. So this really is a global pandemic, and this is in our higher income setting where iron deficiency is much less common. So I guess one of the most important things to take away is that just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal. So that's why we made the change, really, to pick up more iron deficiency so people can get treatment.
Can I ask you more about that? Because the effects of iron deficiency are felt disproportionately across different communities, as you mentioned. Who is most affected?
Children and women, or people who menstruate or give birth and lactate, those people are at highest risk. And that is because when one is growing, developing, pregnant, when one menstruates monthly, those are all high iron demand states. And so blood is the richest source of iron. It accounts for 70% of our total body iron. So the more blood that you lose, it means the more iron that you lose. And the less iron that you have, the less capable you are to make more red blood cells. So it becomes a vicious cycle.
Ontario Health says the new guidelines are an important first step in improving how people are diagnosed. So what other changes would you like to see to help people?
Yeah, so this change is happening at the largest community laboratories in Ontario, and they also have a presence in other provinces and territories. So we're really happy that this is the beginning of a national change. The next step really is a lot of knowledge translation. And so myself and many other people who worked on this developed a website to facilitate diagnosis and treatment and make it easier for patients themselves, as well as their primary care providers, to treat iron deficiency. And that's because it's not as simple as handing out iron pills. Iron pills are associated with gastrointestinal symptoms, and about 30% of people have those symptoms. So it's really important to help people figure out which iron supplement is best for them, when they should best advocate for intravenous iron, and also to facilitate access to intravenous iron.
Let's take a moment and talk about motherhood, shall we? The three of us, we are all moms. We know it can be a beautiful thing. We are also very real and know it can be challenging and frustrating. Well, a new online series is making space for all of those feelings.
Mom Life Crisis. It's a 5-part digital series presented by our friends at The Social, specifically Kate McKenna. A group of moms have very real, raw conversations about being a modern day mom.
So Kate McKenna is joining us, who's the series host. This is a conversation you won't want to miss.
So I want to take everyone back and set this up. This past spring, you were guest co-hosting on The Social, and that day, one of the chats was about this comment from Lily Allen.
So Lily Allen revealed on the Radio Times podcast that this is what she said: her kids ruined her career.
So Kate, you were incredibly moved by this. You shared that you felt a lot of feelings since becoming a mom, and one of them was feeling very angry. You were incredibly vulnerable when you shared this, and then you had an overwhelming response from viewers. What did they say?
Just that they felt seen. And I didn't mean to get emotional that day. I think I was extra tired and just in the throes of having, as you all know, a 2-year-old and then I think 4-year-old. And people said, thank you. Like, this is how I'm feeling too. How can we get more of this? So that's sort of where the idea came from.
Okay, so take me through the series, Mom Life Crisis. From that, it was born. Can you share a little bit about the project?
Yes, it's a 5-part digital series. It's all available on YouTube now. And in each episode, we talk about one particular theme. So motherhood and identity, motherhood and career, how motherhood impacts your friendships, your relationships, your sex life. Where did the village go? So we tackle it all. And I like to describe it as almost mom group therapy, but with no therapist and lots of cameras. But it was just so raw. It was so real. We have moms of one kid, multiple kids, moms of twins, moms who wanted to have kids, moms who didn't, who got pregnant accidentally, who tried for years to get pregnant and had to go through IVF, moms who suffered miscarriages, stillbirth, so many similarities, so many differences. But again, the common factor was a desire to have very real conversations about this.
How did you find the moms for the project?
Through a variety of sources. We put out an all call on the social media accounts. So a few of the moms came in that way. I talked to many, many moms who expressed interest in this. So found a few that way, a few referrals from friends who were like, hey, I have a mom friend who's also really angry, but would love to talk about this. And I have to say, the group that we assembled, who you can see here, they're remarkable. And the fact that these are not air quotes, TV women. These are Canadian women, a variety of different professions, and their eloquence, their articulateness, their candor, you got to watch the series. They're remarkable.
There are so many things you touched on that you talk about in each episode, about the early days of motherhood, about all the body changes that you go through. What stands out for you as like a key moment that you took away?
Well, probably the moment that was most profound, and I think our director said she was in tears, many of the crew members were in tears, was a woman by the name of Sabrina, a lawyer, a mom of 3, talking about her stillbirth. And she spoke for 4 minutes. And I know that because, in the post-production process, you're looking at the clock. And she spoke without flinching for 4 minutes about her stillbirth experience and how the medical system let her down. And it was remarkable. And as she says, she shares this story because she doesn't want other women to fall through the gap that she did. And so for me, that is the takeaway, that, the more we can talk about this, the better.
There's so many times as a mom where the line you get from other people is enjoy every moment. And it feels so hollow in those hard moments because every moment isn't enjoyable. If you could go back now and talk to yourself pre-kids, what advice would you give yourself?
Ooh. That you're not going to feel how you thought you'd feel, that you might not be blissed out, that you might not love it as much as you thought you would, and that's okay, but it's going to be really uncomfortable. But the more you can find people who think like you, the more of a lifeboat that provides you.
And that doesn't mean you don't love your kids.
Well, that's
doesn't
just
mean you
it.
don't love this process.
I think there's a few reasons why women don't like to talk this openly and honestly. I think social media has created a situation where we see the pain going on around the world, so we feel like our pain shouldn't matter because in the grand scheme of things, given everything that's going on, be quiet. Your life is fine. So people don't talk about it. And also, I think there's a fear that, as you say, if I say this, people will think I hate my children. I love my kids more than anything on the planet. It is a fierce, deep love that I didn't know could exist. And I am very angry about the way I spend most days. And I think the more we can reconcile that both those things can coexist, the better, the better it'll be.
Thanks for being with us today.
For more great conversations, download or hit subscribe to Your Morning the Podcast on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcast.
And don't forget, please join us live weekday mornings on CTV CTV News Channel or on your CTV News app. Start your morning with us.